Welcome to my presentation on the SAS Global Forum. I'm going to present about open source SAS macros, what, where and how. My name is Katja and I'm working since more than 14 years in the pharmaceutical industry. I am now part-time consultant concentrating on open source solutions for pharma. I've also published an open source portal for clinical study evaluations where you can find various solutions. And I'm very happy to perform open source projects and provide guidance. I'm going to start with an introduction. We'll show you the licenses, which are the most common ones. The core point of my presentation will be the available solutions, and I will finish with aspects and a summary. So what is open source about? Open source software is software that can freely be accessed, changed and shared in modified or unmodified form by anyone. So you can really compare it to free software, but additionally you can look into the source code and you can even modify the source code. The licenses matter, so you have to make sure to know how you can make for the use of source code. The content is typically provided by motivated persons who are very open and would like to share the source code. So the personal motivation counts. And depending on the motivation lines, you also will find specific content of open source solutions. So what you typically will find is the functionality. So people would like to create something and will show that it's been working, so the functionality will be available. You will also very likely find some basic kind of documentation and also a communication, because people would like to share their results, share their source code, so they also provide a little documentation, sometimes even more, sometimes even less. If you're looking for things like training or even validation, this is typically which is hardly available for open source solutions, and this is because of the motivation line. I mean, if you just would like to show that things are working, why do you need to perform a training or even do a validation or quality checks on your macro? This is typically where the motivation line is really important. If it comes to validation, which is a very important aspect for various branches, then you should think about, okay, if you are copying a program from a colleague, what is the validation you perform? Is your colleague in the fault if you apply his program on your purpose differently and get an error? So how is validation be performed? And the same is true also for open source usage. So if you copy a program from him or her, and it's an open source program, it's also the person who is using the program who is responsible for performing the validation. If you don't have any validation requirements, then you also can just simply reuse it right away. But if you have, it's the same like if you copy it from a colleague. So what licenses are available? There are two major kinds of licenses. There are the permissible licenses, which are very open, and on the other side, there are copyleft licenses. Open source, the core points of open source is available in all types. So the permissible licenses allow relicensing of derived work. It's very similar to by-attribution. On the other side, the copyleft licenses, here the derives must use the same license. It's similar to share alike. So the core rights, which is to use, to modify, and to share, is available on both types. For the permissible license, it's also very easy to create proprietary versions to sell things. On the copyleft, you also have to grant the users the same rights. So users should also be available to share, use, and modify your modified version. The concrete license types are for the permissible license, the MIT license, which is the most common one, which is very short and easy to use. Then there's also the Apache license and also the BSD license. And on the copyleft side, the most commonly used licenses are from the GNU family. And this is a GPL, and there are two different forms of GPL, which is the AGPL and the LGPL. And these are really the typically most commonly used licenses. If you want to use a software, an open source software, where a license is available, you can simply copy the code to your own environment, modify it, and use it for whatever. And if you only stay within your organization or your company, you don't need to publish anything. You can just really use it within your own company. A little bit more complex it becomes if you're using copyleft licenses, because if you then have different users like externals or academia or authorities, then you must also grant these users the same rights, meaning they must also be able to use, share, and modify whatever you have done. So let's now concentrate on our main point, which are the available solutions. So the first question is, which solutions exist? How do we know them? The announcement of open source is quite difficult. So for R, we do have the CRAN package. So in CRAN, you can search for any kind of open source tools, but in SAS, it's a little bit difficult. You, of course, can do a presentation at a conference, and you also find a lot of presentations and papers about conferences online. But it's very tough to figure out, okay, is it about an open source tool? Which open source tools are available? So it's really hard to find. For this, I've created the open source portal for clinical study evaluations. So here you have a broad overview about what solutions are available. And actually, you cannot just only use it for pharma, you can also use it for other branches, because you can find the SAS macros and programs and tools which are not specifically designed for pharma, but also for other use cases as well. On the overview page, you really can find which systems are available. So you get a quick overview about what kind of tools are available, what kind of macro groups. And there's also a second area, which is a program area. And here you can even search for specific scripts and macros. Currently, there are more than around 700 macros and scripts included in the repository. So if you use for compare or for directory, you will definitely find some macros in there. If you filter for SAS, you already find 17 different solutions which are available, which we will come to now. There are, for example, a lot of SAS macros, but there are as well SAS scripts available and also some tools. So let's now first look at the scripts and macros. First of all, we do have the Fuse white paper scripts. Fuse is an organization specifically for the clinical area. It has a very huge community and also has various projects, and typically the outcome of those working groups are open source. So for example, there are also a lot of scripts out there, and the white paper scripts are programs which create tables and listings which are used for clinical study evaluations. But if you would like to check out, for example, how to create a complex box plot and really see an example, then you can just have a look at the programs, copy it, modify it, and apply to your own data. Next to graphics, there are also tables, and there are really quite a lot of examples available. The FDA, which is a US medical authority, has also provided an open source framework which is called the FDA Jumpstart scripts. This is a very generic clinical, this creates a very generic clinical standards table based on the clinical standard data format, which is called SDTM. And these are various macros which create finally in the end Excel files with complex tables and also graphs in there. But this tool is as well available as open source. So if you would like, instead of Excel, to have different output, you just can take the tool available, modify it, and apply it to your own data. And they are really very complex tables. I mean, next to the basics like a demographic table, you also find some kind of shift tables for laboratory parameters. So there's not only creating tables, but it's also doing a lot of derivations in there. So you can just check out how things are done. The FDA Jumpstart script is a little bit more complex, but it's available as open source. SAS has the blogs where you also can find quite useful examples. Specifically, I would like to mention the SAS visualization blog, which is really very valuable to figure out how to create very fancy graphics. They quite often have in their blogs also the source code attached. Unluckily, the license is missing. If a license is missing, it means it's copyright work. So using it right away is a little bit more complicated. This is nothing you should do. So either you should ask SAS whether they can attach a license for this, or you can use the idea of a source code and re-implement it in your own style. Raw Inc. is a company who's very much using open source and creating also open source. They have a lot of web applications also for the clinical area. And they also provide a few macros, which are creating quite nice graphics, which are not out of the standard. In this example here, you will see a vial line plot, but there's also a B chart, and they also provide a sanctuary bar chart. Then there are the SAS.js core macros. They are specifically developed for others. The main maintainer here is Alan Bow, who's quite well known. They are quite small, useful supporting macros like to get information like the type and so on. There's also check macros available, so to check whether a data set exists, a variable exists. But there are also more complex macros in, like to create directories or to perform a binary copy, create a cards from a data set. There are quite some useful macros. Actually, SAS.js is a web framework for SAS, but it contains a lot of single SAS macros, like the core macros I've already mentioned, but there are also special metadata server macros and also some special buyer macros available, which you also can use outside of the SAS web app framework. The next package I would like to mention is the Smile package, which is for smart SAS macros. This is created by myself, and here you can find quite nice macros, for example, for PDF processing. So there's a macro to create out of ODS documents a flat PDF file structure. So if you don't want to have the multiple levels, which are typically created by SAS outputs, if you're using by statements, you can really get rid of them and really get a flat bookmark navigation by using this macro. There's also a macro available to read in the bookmarks into a SAS dataset, which is quite useful if you would like to perform some quality checks on PDF documents, or you can also merge PDF files. The next framework is from Scott Bass. He's an IT consultant living in Australia, and he also is very open to share his macros. So in his time, he has created quite some macros, and he's releasing them as open source in his GitHub repository. There are things like for decimal alignment, format creation, reading in Excel files, getting some performance statistics from the log, and so on. So it's quite some useful macros. Then there is an example also would be, for example, the compare macro. And here, for example, you can compare very easily two libraries, and then you get a final data set and also log information where you quickly get an overview, okay, which are the data sets which had been differences and how many are there in, and it's very easy to apply these macros and to get the result out there. And if you would like to know how to do so what's the concrete proc compare, for example, you can check out the source code. Then there's a macro framework from Roland. Roland Rushlayberry has published many macros, so in total there are 243 macros. He has published also a very huge clinical evaluation framework, which had been developed long years ago. And then he also decided to publish the source code so others can benefit from this and use them. And these many supporting macros are quite useful. So if you're looking for many tiny things, you can check out this package. Next to the scripts and macros, there are also concrete and more complex tools available. Tools are typically more used like tools and less like open source, so it's rarely that you need to look into the source code, but you could do. The biggest tool which is available, at least which I am aware of, is the SAS unit framework. And this is a validation framework. This is very complex. It's been developed since years and it's always continuously updated. So it by now has really quite a lot of functionality and is extremely valuable. It's comparable to JUnit, which is a validation framework for Java, but here it's specifically for unit tests for SAS. So if you would like to perform quality checks or validations, check out this tool. The next tool is Reindeer. This is to render SAS results into Word documents. So this is a VBA tool. This is a sponsored project which has been created by which has been sponsored by Klinstadt GmbH and created by myself. And this tool is available to embed RTF files, listings, but also graphics into Word documents. So you do have those SAS outputs. Additionally, you have a Word template, and the tool is merging them together, making nice formatting and so on, and will create the final Word document, which you also can export to PDF. So there's also a PDF export functionality available. The configuration can also be done by a text file, which is quite useful. So you can specify what the macro should do in another program in SAS to create just a text file containing the configuration. The last tool I would like to present or mention is StatTech. StatTech is a plugin for Microsoft Word, and this can be used to execute SAS, R, or Stata programs directly from Word. So you have your plugin in Word, and there you can specify the code, you can run the code, and whatever the code provides back, it will be included in your Word document. So it's really programming or combining the source code directly in your Word program. And if you get new data, you just can update or run all the programs again, and then you will get the latest numbers in there, which is pretty nice. As you can see, there are many available solutions available. It's just on us to find them and also to create new open source. So let's have a look at some aspects to consider. Of course, we can just easily use open source. Check out the license nevertheless. There are special licenses available for some tools, which are non-commercial licenses. But it's really the minority. If you're looking for SAS macros and scripts, they are typically they're using the common licenses. So the most common licenses are really MIT and the GNU licenses. There's also an overview available in the internet, so you can check it out. What is important to be aware about is the warranty and validation. Typically, no warranty and validation is provided. I mean, open source is created by a community, and even if you have a tool which is used by hundreds, thousands of users, it's not guaranteed that there isn't a bug available in one very specific use case. So it's not the community to blame. If you find a bug, report the bug back, so it will likely be corrected. But there, of course, can be bugs. It's the same like if you create a program, how often do you have a bug in, right? Of course, no one has ever bugs in their programs, but, at the end, there are no bugs. But in between, there are always some small stuff. So just think about the challenges. The creation of open source is typically no challenge because it's the fun part. But if you think about, okay, how do I document or comment or tell the world that my open source tool is available, that's already difficult. If it comes to maintenance and fixes, if the person is still actively maintaining the source code, that's really excellent. But if the maintainer is already doing something different, like even not working with SAS anymore, then the maintenance might not be available. Documentation is sometimes an issue for open source projects, and validation and quality control is typically not scope of open source projects. And these challenges really come from motivation. So to enable more open source, it's very important that you allow your employees and contractors to publish open source, to join open collaborations, to invest in open source, and what's also very important, if you publish source code in posts, in blogs, or in papers, include a license, because if you don't include a license, the copyright applies and other people cannot just simply use your code. Why investments? Investments are very great to allow a higher motivation to create quality checks, for example, and documentation. So really think about investments as well. If you would like to create open source, that's straightforward and quite easy. For a SAS license, you could use, for example, the SAS on demand for academics or the university edition, because open source is really likely the non-commercial license. So if you're non-commercial, you could use these things. Apply the license. Here I would strongly recommend using the MIT, which is the most flexible one. Store it online, like on GitHub, GitLab, SourceForge. and do communication in social media, on conferences, and also in the open source portal. So what have we learned? We have a high potential to simplify our work with open source software. Solutions are available, and you can even find them using the open source portal. So it's on us to exploit the potential. But it's on us also to enhance the potential. So allow employees and contractors to publish open source, join open collaborations, and invest in open source. If you would like to have additional information, you can check out my YouTube channel, you can check out the open source portal, and of course there are also general open source guides available. For more questions, you can contact me via email, and now I'm also online for further questions now. Thanks, I hope you enjoyed my presentation.